When I was a little kid, something happened that I've never been able to shake. For most of my life, I honestly believed it was just a dream, one of those strange, foggy, too real dreams that stay with you. But recently, my mom brought it up out of nowhere, and when she started talking about it, I said, "Wait, that really happened?" And she looked at me and said, "Yeah." That's when I realized that one of the scariest memories from my childhood wasn't a dream at all, it was real. And honestly, I wish I'd never found that out. I must have been about 4 years old. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to this heavy, eerie silence. You know that feeling when you just know you're alone in the house, even though there's no way you could possibly know? That's exactly what it felt like. The air was still, thick. I got out of bed and padded toward my parents' room, too short to reach any light switches, so the only light came from the moon through the windows. Their bed was empty. So, I went downstairs, calling softly, but no one answered. When I got to the living room, the TV was on, but just static. That fuzzy gray snow filling the screen. No programs, no sound but the soft hiss. I still don't know what time it was or why any channel would just be static, but that's what I saw. And everything around me was bathed in these strange, flickering red lights, like something was glowing outside. At the time, I didn't understand what that was. Later, I'd learned the truth. I remember going into the kitchen next, hoping to find my mom or dad there. And at first I didn't notice her, the woman sitting silently at the kitchen table. When she finally spoke, I nearly jumped out of my skin. She told me not to turn on the light when I reached for the stool, so I didn't. The only thing I could see was her outline, the curve of her shoulders, the shape of her hair, faintly lit by the moon through the window. And what still chills me to this day is that I swear, she wasn't wearing any clothes. Just completely bare. I don't know why that didn't terrify me as a kid, but I just sort of accepted it. She said she was the neighbor, that my parents had gone somewhere and asked her to watch over me. That they'd be back soon, but until then, she was here. And that she'd always be here. Before I could even ask what she meant by that, the sound of the front door unlocking made me turn. I ran into the hallway, relieved. It was my parents coming inside. They turned the lights on, and my mom scooped me up, saying how sorry they were for leaving me alone. I told her it was fine, that the neighbor lady had been keeping me company and said she'd always stay with me. When my parents asked who I was talking about, I pointed toward the kitchen. But when we went in, the chair where she'd been sitting was knocked over, and the back door was wide open. When my mom brought the memory up years later, I asked her if she remembered anything else. She did. Apparently, that night there had been a house fire a few streets over, and they'd stepped outside to check what was going on with the other neighbors. That explained the flashing red lights that had painted my memory. But then she told me something new, something that made my stomach drop. She said that when they came back in, I told them that the woman had come to take me away, not to watch me. And that I'd said she was slimy. At the time, I couldn't explain what that meant, but my parents had found a jar on the kitchen table covered in a strange, clear, sticky substance. They always wondered if maybe the fire and the woman were somehow connected. That maybe whatever covered her was some kind of accelerant. And honestly, I can't stop thinking about that. It's nice, I guess, knowing it wasn't just a dream, that I didn't imagine it. But it's also made me realize something. Being home alone still makes my skin crawl, even now, all these years later. So, my family has this story that we all still talk about, partly because it's terrifying, and partly because, in a weird way, it's kind of comforting. It's about my dad. He was a park ranger out near Beacon Rock, and something that happened when I was around 10 years old. Back then, my parents were separated, and my relationship with Dad was complicated. He wasn't a bad father, just not built for the quiet family life. He loved being outdoors, and the forest was where he truly belonged. When I finally got to spend a summer with him at his ranger cabin, it meant the world to me. We did everything: fishing, hiking, exploring trails. He even humored me when I begged him to tell me stories about Bigfoot. He never fully believed, but I did. And that summer would make sure I never stopped believing. One night, Dad got a call. There was a search and rescue happening miles down the park, and they needed every available ranger. He didn't want to leave me alone, but I told him it was okay. I had my Wii, I had snacks, and besides, I liked the idea of him being out there saving someone's life. So he left, and I stayed behind, playing games until it got late. At some point, I heard footsteps on the porch. I figured Dad had come back early, but when I looked toward the door, something felt off. He always used his key. This person didn't. The doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to open it. Then, silence. A still, waiting kind of silence. That's when I caught the smell. Wet fur. Earthy, musky, like a wet dog, but stronger. Exactly like the smell Dad had once described when we joked about Bigfoot. Then came a soft tapping on the door. 3 taps. Like a greeting. But before I could even process it, something shattered in the back room. Wood splintering. Someone was trying to break in from the back window. I ran down the hall, peeking around the doorway just in time to see a man, a human man, trying to pry the window open. He looked desperate. When he noticed me, he pushed harder, trying to force the window up. I screamed for help. And then came the roar. It was deep, guttural, not human. It shook the entire cabin. Heavy footsteps thundered from outside, and the man froze instantly. He bolted. Vanished into the woods. A few seconds later, something massive ran past the window, huge, fast, and dark, the shape just barely visible in the moonlight. I locked the window, turned off every light, and hid under the table, shaking. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep there. When I woke up again, it was dawn, and the smell was back. That same musky, wet dog scent near the front door. But instead of feeling scared, I felt safe. Protected. And I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, Dad came back, surprised to see me under the table. He was holding something in his hand, a small rock with a feather underneath it. He said he found it right outside the door, perfectly placed, like someone had left it there intentionally. It hadn't been there when he left. When I told him what happened, he went pale. Turns out, the search and rescue wasn't for a lost hiker. It was for a man who'd pushed his friend down a cliff and run off into the forest. They never caught him. But Dad and I both believe he was the same man who tried to break into the cabin that night. As for who, or what, chased him off, well, I think you already know. When I was little, I bounced around in foster care a lot. Most of my memories from that time are quiet, lonely even, but one of them still haunts me. It was terrifying when it happened, but weirdly enough, it ended up saving my life. At the time, I'd just been placed with a couple named the Harrisons. They weren't cruel, but they didn't really care about me either. I was just a paycheck to them, another foster kid to fill a room. They left me alone most nights, which didn't bother me much since I was shy, quiet, and used to taking care of myself. I spent most evenings reading under my bed or watching TV. It wasn't the worst place I'd ever lived, until that one night. I was sitting on the couch watching cartoons when there was a knock at the door. It startled me because no one ever came by when I was home alone. Mr. Harrison always told me, "Don't answer the door, don't make a mess, brush your teeth before bed." I wasn't about to break the rule. So, I crept toward the hallway, just close enough to listen. Whoever was out there must have heard me move, because a man's voice called softly through the door. He said he was from CPS, Child Protective Services, and that he was just checking to make sure I was okay. For a moment, I almost believed him. But something felt wrong. His voice was too friendly, too rehearsed. Then he said the Harrisons had told him to stop by, that they knew he was coming. He even said their full names. That made my stomach twist. But when I didn't answer, he changed his story. Now he said he was a friend of the Harrisons, just there to grab his wallet he'd left behind. I might have been 6 years old, but even then, I knew that didn't make sense. I told him I couldn't open the door, that the Harrisons said never to. At first, he acted proud of me. Then suddenly he snapped. He slammed his fists against the door, screaming. The words he yelled. I still can't repeat them. He called me horrible names, cursed me, pounded harder and harder. I ran upstairs and hid in the closet, shaking, listening to his voice turn from angry to hateful to quiet. Then there were new voices outside, shouting, crashing, chaos. The Harrisons had come home. After a while, everything went silent. The door slammed. And then I heard Mrs. Harrison calling my name, telling me to come out. When I finally did, they didn't hug me or comfort me. They just looked, irritated. Mr. Harrison told me it was over and to go to bed. I didn't ask what had happened. I didn't dare. The next morning, he was gone. Mrs. Harrison made me breakfast like nothing happened. And then a knock came again. This time, it really was my caseworker from CPS. She said I was being moved back to the group home. No explanation. Mrs. Harrison wouldn't even look at me. On the drive back, I mentioned the man who came to the door, and my caseworker just said softly, I know, sweetheart, and patted my hair. I never saw the Harrisons again. Years later, I tried to find out who they were, but there's nothing about them anywhere. Like they just disappeared. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I can guess. And honestly, I'm glad I'll never have to find out.